The phone buzzed at exactly 1:47 in the morning. I know the time because I'd been half awake anyway, listening to the rain come in off the ridge. When you get to my age, sleep becomes a negotiation. Some nights you win. Most nights the rain wins, or your knees do, or your mind starts pulling at old threads for no good reason at all. The screen lit up the whole ceiling. One name. Laura. I picked the phone up off the nightstand and read the message twice, though I didn't need to read it twice. One word doesn't take long to understand. Bluebird. No period. No emoji. No explanation attached. Just that one word sitting there in the blue-white glow of my screen at 1:47 in the morning, while rain hammered against the bedroom window like it had somewhere urgent to be. My thumb hovered over her name. I didn't call back. I want you to understand that it wasn't cold. It wasn't panic either. I put the phone face down on the mattress, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and sat there for a moment in the dark the way a man does when he already knows what the next several hours are going to ask of him, and he's just giving himself one quiet breath before they start. Then I found my pants on the floor beside the bed. Flannel shirt from the chair by the window. Socks, one of them inside out, but that was fine. I wasn't dressing for anyone. The house was completely still except for the rain. I moved down the hallway without turning on any lights. I know this house well enough. 11 years of walking it in the dark will do that. I passed the spare bedroom, and the door was open the way it always is, and even in the dark I could make out the shape of the made bed inside. Clean pillow, folded blanket at the foot. Everything exactly where it should be. Waiting, I kept moving. The truck keys hang on a hook beside the back door. They've hung on that same hook for 11 years. Small brass hook, nothing special, the kind you'd buy at any hardware store for about $1.25. I put it there the week I moved in, and I've put the keys on it every single night since. Some habits aren't about convenience. Some habits are about being ready. I took the keys without turning the porch light on. Before I stepped outside, I pulled out my phone one more time and typed a message to Louise. Short, no punctuation other than the number. Bluebird 90. Sent. Then I pushed open the back door and the rain came at me sideways off the ridge, and I walked out into it anyway, and the truck started on the first turn the way it always does, and the headlights swept across the wet driveway, and then I was gone. To understand why I didn't call back, I need to tell you about a pine table and an 11-year-old girl. Welcome to Silent Father. Find yourself a comfortable seat and stay a while. They say the quietest person in the room is usually the most prepared. Tonight, I want to tell you about a promise I made 23 years ago and kept in the rain. My name is Henry Quinn. This is what the bluebird means. Anne died on a Tuesday in October, which is the kind of specific detail you never forget and never really want to remember either. Laura was 11 years old. I was 43. And just like that, the two of us were sitting across from each other at a pine kitchen table, trying to figure out how the mornings were supposed to work now. I drove a school bus. I had done it for 9 years by then. And I want to tell you something about driving a school bus that most people don't think about. You see the same children every single day. You learn which ones are tired, which ones are hungry, which ones are carrying something heavy that no child should have to carry. I knew those kids. And for 4 years, from the September after Anne passed until Laura started middle school and decided the bus was embarrassing, my own daughter sat 3 rows back on the left side, by the window, every single morning while I drove. I don't think she knew how much that meant to me. Having her close, I got up at 5:10 every weekday, left oatmeal on the stove with a lid on it and a yellow sticky note that said the same thing every morning, Bird, because that's what Anne used to call her. I didn't plan it the first time, it just came out. And then Laura didn't say anything about it, so I kept doing it. Some things you keep doing because stopping feels like losing something twice. There were larger sacrifices that nobody saw. When Laura was 16, my supervisor position came open nearly $18,000 more a year. I turned it down. Would have moved me to a different district, different school, different everything. I did it again at 21 years in. Same offer, same answer. Laura never knew. I didn't tell her because it wasn't her burden to carry. It was just a decision. When her nursing certification aid fell through at 22, I'd already set aside most of it. Took me 4 years saving quietly. $22,000. I handed her a cashier's check and told her not to make a fuss. She made a fuss anyway. The pine table is still in my kitchen. Anne's initials and Laura's are carved small on the underside A+L, something Anne did one afternoon when she thought I wasn't watching. I've never refinished that table. I never will. The code word came about 2 months after Anne was gone. Laura was having nightmares. Not every night, but enough that I'd started sleeping lighter, listening for her down the hall. One evening she came and sat across from me at that pine table, and she looked so small and so serious that it stopped my heart a little. I told her, pick a word, any word, just between us. If you ever feel unsafe, and you can't explain it on the phone in front of someone, or in a place where talking isn't safe, you text me that word. Nothing else needed, no questions asked on the call. I just come. She thought about it for less than 10 seconds. Bluebird, she said, because Mom loved them. I thought she might forget it in a year or two the way children sometimes do with things like that. She was 11 and grieving, and the world was very large and very uncertain around her. She never forgot it. 23 years later, at 1:47 in the morning, she used it for the first time. For a long time after she married Mark, I told myself that quiet meant happy. Mark Darren came into Laura's life when she was 29, and I want to be honest with you, I didn't dislike him at first. He shook my hand firmly, remembered my coffee order the second time he met me, and brought a decent bottle of wine to Sunday dinner without being asked. Laura laughed around him in a way that looked real. After years of watching her manage everything alone, I was glad she had someone. The Sunday calls continued after they married. I looked forward to them more than I probably admitted to myself. She'd call around 7, sometimes still in her scrubs from a long shift, and we'd talk about nothing important, the garden, the weather, a patient who'd made her laugh, just her voice. That was enough. Then the calls became texts. I told myself that was just how people communicated now. Then the texts started sounding like they'd been written carefully. Not short the way a busy person writes short, but considered, measured, like someone choosing each word with someone else in the room. I didn't write that observation down. Not yet. I just felt it and filed it away the way you do when you don't quite want to know what something means. The first real crack showed up at Christmas, 2 years ago. Laura and I had a standing arrangement. She'd drive up the 23rd, stay 2 nights, leave the 26th. We'd done it every year. Then 2 days before, a text arrived. Mark thinks the travel is too stressful for us right now. So sorry, Dad. Next year for sure. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because she wasn't coming, people cancel. Life happens. But because of the phrasing. Mark thinks. Now we have decided. Now, I'm not up for it. Mark thinks. Easter came and went the same way. I'd been invited initially. Laura called, sounded genuinely happy about it. Then, a group text arrived from Mark's number 3 days later. We've decided to keep it a small family this year. I hope everyone understands. I scrolled through the recipients. Laura wasn't on it. Louise noticed before I was ready to admit there was anything to notice. Louise Pemberton has lived on the other side of my garden fence for 14 years. She and Anne were close, and after Anne passed, she just quietly stayed close to us too. That's the kind of woman she is. Doesn't announce herself, just shows up with a casserole when it's needed, and says hard things gently when they need saying. She stopped me one afternoon while I was turning over the garden bed, leaned on the fence post with her arms folded. "Henry," she said, "has Laura sounded like herself to you lately? Last time I saw her, she asked permission to have a second cookie." She paused. "That ain't my Laura. I told Louise that Laura was probably just tired. That marriage takes adjustment. That Mark was particular about things, which wasn't necessarily wrong. Louise looked at me the way women of a certain wisdom look at men who are rationalizing something they already know. She didn't argue, just nodded and went back inside. The morning I drove 45 miles with a flat of tomato plants in the truck bed, I genuinely thought I was just being a good father. Laura had mentioned wanting a kitchen garden. I had extra seedlings. It seemed simple. Mark answered the door. He was polite about it, I'll give him that, but his eyes told me I'd done something inconvenient. He took the plants from my arms before I'd even finished explaining and said, very evenly, "We appreciate it, Henry, but we do like a schedule. Best to call ahead next time." Laura wasn't home. He said she was at work. She may well have been. That evening she texted, "Thanks for the plants." I looked at that message for a long time. Laura did not use periods after smiley faces. She never had. It was a small thing, an absurdly small thing. But it sat wrong. I drove home, went to the kitchen drawer, and found an old spiral notebook, the kind Louise had handed me weeks earlier, saying she had extras. At the top of the first page I wrote the date. Then I wrote what had happened. Then I wrote Mark's words down exactly as I remembered them. I started the log that evening. I hoped I'd never need it for anything. 6 weeks ago, I wrote down something I wish I hadn't had to. 3 weeks before that text arrived, my phone rang at 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't pick up because the number showed as unknown, but something made me answer. It was Laura, whispering, "Dad, I can't talk long." Her voice had that particular flatness of someone speaking carefully in an open space, choosing every syllable. I heard a car door close. A parking lot, I figured. Somewhere she'd managed to get alone for a few minutes. She talked fast and quiet. Mark had taken her spare car key, just picked it up off the hook one morning without saying anything, and never returned it. The shared bank account she'd had access to for 3 years had a new password she wasn't given. Her nursing shifts she'd gone back part-time 8 months ago, after Mark had persuaded her to step away from full-time work to help manage his rental properties. He was now calling those shifts too much disruption for the family. And he read her messages. Not sometimes. Regularly, she said it plainly, the way you say something you've already spent a long time making peace with. Then she said the thing that stayed with me longest, the thing I wrote down that same evening in the notebook. Mark had told Laura that I was manipulative, that expecting a weekly phone call from a grown married woman was a form of control, that I needed to understand she had a family of her own now. I held the phone and I did not say one argumentative word. Not because I didn't have them. I had plenty. But I knew she hadn't called me from a grocery store parking lot to hear me get angry. She'd called because she needed someone to know where she was standing. "You know where I am," I told her. That was all. She said she was fine. Said it the way people say it when they mean the opposite, but aren't ready to say that yet. Then she hung up. 19 days of silence followed. No texts, no calls, nothing. I understood why she couldn't call at 1:47 in the morning. Mark kept his phone on the charger in the bedroom. She'd mentioned that detail once in passing months earlier, and I'd written it down without knowing why it mattered. He checked her call history. A one-word text, sent quickly, could be deleted in under 5 seconds before he stirred. A phone call was a different thing entirely. So she did what a grieving 11-year-old had decided on 23 years ago at a pine kitchen table. She used the one thing that had always been just ours. I knew the distance to her subdivision was 90 miles. I knew because I'd driven it 3 times and clocked it each time out of the habit of a man who drove routes for a living. I knew her bedroom window faced the street because I'd helped them move a couch up the front stairs when they first settled in, and I'd stood in that room long enough to understand its layout. I also knew something else. I couldn't call the police for a forced entry. Laura hadn't asked for that, and until she opened that door herself, it wasn't my door to open. Whatever happened on the other side of it had to be her choice. My job was simply to make sure she knew the choice was available. That's the line I kept turning over through all 90 miles of rain and dark highway. Not what I would do when I got there, just that I would be there when she decided. I did not turn on the porch light when I left. Louise would know what that meant. I want to be clear about something. None of what I'd prepared over those 6 years came from a place of suspicion or dark thinking. It came from the same place the brass hook came from, and the oatmeal on the stove, and the sticky notes that said morning bird. It came from being a father who understood that readiness isn't fear. It's just love with its boots on. The log I mentioned, I kept it faithfully. Dates, canceled visits, exact wording of texts and calls. Not to build a case against anyone. Just because a man who drove routes for 30 years knows that details matter and memory is unreliable, and a spiral notebook costs less than $1.50. The spare bedroom I kept ready the entire time. Clean sheets changed the first of every month, whether anyone was coming or not. Laura's old quilt, the yellow one Anne picked out when Laura was 7, folded at the foot of the bed. Small lamp on the nightstand, bulb replaced last spring. The room didn't wait for an emergency, it just waited. In the kitchen drawer, behind the takeout menus and the extra batteries, I kept a plain white envelope. Inside it, a copy of Laura's nursing certificate she'd once left at my house after a recertification, her birth certificate copy, and an insurance card from 3 years back. Copies only, nothing taken that wasn't already mine to hold. I kept them because the parking lot phone call had taught me that a person leaving a difficult situation often leaves with nothing. And paperwork matters more than people expect in the first quiet days after. Louise knew, not everything, but enough. She'd been a county dispatcher for 22 years before she retired, and one afternoon over the fence she told me plainly, "If you ever need to move fast, text me a word in the miles." She'd keep my house key and leave a light on. 2 days before the Bluebird text arrived, Mark posted in the family group chat without Laura visible on the thread that he and Laura were focusing on their relationship and would appreciate space from extended family for a while. I did not call him. I did not confront him. I simply kept a room ready and a tank full of gas. At mile 60, the rain got heavier. I turned the wipers up and kept driving. At mile 88, I turned off the highway and cut my headlights for the last 2 blocks. Laura had mentioned once, casually, that the motion sensor light above the garage wakes the whole house. She'd said it about a neighbor's delivery. I'd written it down anyway. I parked 2 houses down at 3:34 in the morning. The rain was still coming steady, the kind that doesn't announce itself anymore, just continues. I sat in the truck for 30 seconds with the engine off, watching the street. Laura's house was dark except for a small kitchen nightlight visible through the side window, a pale yellow square in all that black. Then the curtain in the street-facing bedroom moved. She'd seen the truck. She knew that shape. She'd grown up watching it pull into driveways. I got out quietly, backpack over one shoulder, the envelope inside, 2 bottles of water, nothing else, and crossed the street in the rain without hurrying. A man moving fast at 3:34 in the morning draws attention. A man walking at an ordinary pace is just a man walking. The front door opened before I reached the bottom porch step. Laura was in gray sweats, hair pulled back, no makeup. She was holding a small duffel bag against her side, dark green, zipper half open. She'd packed it weeks ago, she told me later, and kept it behind the laundry room door inside a plastic storage bin. She'd thought about this. She'd been thinking about it for a while. I put my arm around her shoulders. One arm, firm, brief, nothing dramatic. We didn't stand there. We moved. She whispered that Mark was upstairs, heavy sleeper, always had been. She whispered that she'd already deleted the text. I nodded. I already knew she would have. We were 10 feet from the truck when the porch light came on. I heard the front door, and then his voice louder than the situation called for. The way people get when they're startled and want to cover the fact that they're startled. What the hell is this, Henry? I stopped. I turned around slowly. Laura was behind me and slightly to my right. I want to tell you that I felt something large and hot moving through my chest at that moment. I did. But I have been driving a route my whole life, and a man on a route doesn't let what he feels change what he does. I opened the passenger door of the truck. I helped Laura in. I closed the door gently, not hard, not slow, just the ordinary sound of a truck door closing at 3:34 in the morning, and then I turned to face him. He was on the porch in shorts and a gray t-shirt, one hand gripping the door frame, squinting against the rain. She texted me, I said. She asked me to come. That was all I said. He started talking about marriage and interference and rights, his voice climbing with each word, and I stood on that wet sidewalk and I let him talk, because I had learned a long time ago that the man who needs to fill the silence rarely controls it. What he didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone except Louise, was that before I'd left my driveway, I'd asked Louise to call the county non-emergency line and request a welfare check at this address. Not an emergency, not an accusation, just a neighbor's concern, properly filed, with timing that Louise, 22 years a dispatcher, understood precisely. The deputy's car rolled quietly to the curb just as Mark's voice reached its highest point. He didn't come in with lights or urgency. He just stepped out, nodded to me, and looked at Laura through the passenger window. She'd already rolled it down. "Ma'am," he said, "are you leaving of your own free will?" Laura looked at him clearly. Yes, one word. No hesitation. Mark's hand tightened on the doorframe. He tried one more time. "This is a marriage, not a kidnapping. Tell them you're staying," but his voice had changed. The confidence had gone somewhere it couldn't find its way back from. Laura said nothing. She didn't need to. I handed the deputy my ID and a folded note Louise had written with my home address and her name and retired dispatch number. He took it, noted the time in his pad, nodded once. Then I looked at Mark. Just once before I walked to the driver's side. "The spare bedroom has been ready for 6 years," I told him. "The only thing new is tonight." He went pale. I watched his hands on the doorframe, and I watched him understand what that meant, that there had been no sudden crisis, no dramatic moment of decision. Just a father who had kept a room made up and a tank full of gas and a notebook in a kitchen drawer, month after month, year after year, waiting on his daughter's own timing. The deputy stayed. We left. I had not raised my voice in 40 years. I did not raise it at 3:34 in the rain either. We did not speak for the first 20 miles. The rain did most of the talking. The rain followed us the whole way home, not heavy, just steady. The kind that blurs the white lines and makes you grip the wheel a little tighter than you need to. Laura sat in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up and her head resting against the window. Neither of us spoke for the first 40 miles, and that was fine. Some silences don't need filling. It was somewhere around mile 40 when she said it quietly, almost to herself. I remembered Bluebird because of Mom's feeder. I kept my eyes on the road. Nodded once. That was enough. We both understood what it meant that she'd been holding on to something of her mother's all that time, even when she couldn't hold on to much else. I didn't say a word, just let it sit there between us like something fragile that deserved to be left undisturbed. We pulled into the driveway at 12 minutes past 5 in the morning. Louise's lights were already on. I don't know how she knew. Maybe she heard the truck. Maybe she just knew the way neighbors do when they've been watching over a house for 19 days and sleeping lightly the whole time. She was at the door before we reached the porch steps, and she didn't say a word either. She just opened her arms and held Laura for a long moment, and Laura let her. Louise looked at me once over Laura's shoulder. I gave a small nod. She said only one thing: no questions tonight. The room was ready. Quilt folded back, lamp on low, the window cracked just enough for cool air. Laura walked in, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked around like she was trying to remember the shape of something she'd almost forgotten. She was asleep within the hour. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't really drink and listened to the rain ease off until it stopped completely. By the time the first birds started, the sky was turning gray at the edges. I went to bed. For the first time in 19 days, I slept. The next morning, Laura asked to borrow my phone. She didn't call a lawyer, not yet. She called a legal aid advocate first just to understand things, she said. General information. Her options. What words like separation and documentation actually meant in practical terms. I gave her the kitchen, closed the back door behind me, and went to pull weeds in the garden until she came out an hour later looking tired but steadier than she had the night before. I had an envelope for her. Her documents, birth certificate, social security card, the old nursing license renewal she'd left behind years ago. I'd kept them in the fireproof box, same as always. She took it without ceremony, sat at the table, and went through every page. Mark called 23 times in the first 48 hours. I know because I logged in every one. I didn't answer. Laura had my number forwarded to her temporarily, and she saw the calls come in too. She watched them the way you watch a storm from inside the house, aware of it, not afraid of it, not going out into it. His texts used words like misunderstanding and let's talk and come home. She read them once, did not reply. I think that was harder than people might imagine, not because she wanted to respond, but because restraint takes real energy. She was using what she had wisely. On the third day, he showed up. I heard the car before I saw it. By the time he reached the porch steps, Louise was already there, coffee cup in hand, standing in that calm way of hers that leaves no room for argument. She said, "She's resting. Come back with a time we agree to." He stood there a moment. Then he left. Louise came back inside, set her cup down, and didn't say anything about it. She just refilled the coffee and sat back down across from me at the table. In the weeks that followed, Laura filed for legal separation. I won't pretend I understood every step of the process that was between her and the advocate, and later her attorney. What I understood was that she was moving forward, one careful step at a time, and she wasn't doing it out of anger. She was doing it out of clarity. She found a transitional apartment not far from her old nursing unit, a modest place with good light. She went back to work per diem nursing shifts, familiar hours. She kept a key to my house. That was her choice, and I was glad for it. The community learned the way small communities always do, quietly and thoroughly. Mark had talked at length, I'm told, about modern family dynamics and giving space. Those words began to carry a different weight once people noticed he'd missed an important client meeting because he'd been sitting in my driveway instead. His business partners didn't make announcements, they simply became less available. That's how things settle in a small town, not with drama, but with memory. There was no courtroom scene, no confrontation, just boundaries, documented and maintained. That's what justice looked like here. Quiet, firm, lasting. We started Thursday dinners. Every week, same pine table, same chairs. Sometimes Louise joins us. Sometimes it's just the two of us, eating whatever's simple and talking about whatever comes up her shifts. My garden, old stories about her mother that we're both starting to remember without so much pain. I closed the log on a Tuesday in November. The final entry read, Nov 12 Bluebird, 90 miles. She came home. I closed the notebook and put it in the fireproof box with everything else. I don't imagine I'll need it, but I kept it. A man keeps records the way he keeps faith quietly, without expecting reward. One Tuesday, not long after she'd settled back in, the three of us were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. Louise, Laura, me, nothing special happened. Just the ordinary kind of evening that used to feel like nothing and now felt like everything. Laura looked at me and said, "Dad, did you really keep my room ready the whole time?" I told her I changed the sheets the first Monday of every month. She laughed first, then she cried. Then she laughed again, and Louise pretended to be very interested in her coffee cup. And I looked out the window at the yard. People ask me sometimes if I was angry that night, the night I drove 90 miles in the rain to bring my daughter home. People ask me if I was angry that night. Honestly, I wasn't. Anger would have been easier in a way. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name, something closer to relief that the system we'd built, one small word agreed upon years ago, had actually held. Laura was 11 when we made that agreement. She's 34 now. And somehow, across all those years and all that distance, a single word still meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. I find that remarkable. I don't think I'll ever stop finding it remarkable. I've been thinking a lot lately about the word family, what it actually means, not the title, the action, because there are people in this world who carry the title without ever doing the work, and there are people who were never given the title at all, but show up anyway every single time, without announcement, without expectation. Louise has never once called herself family. But she had the coffee on at 5 in the morning. She stood on that porch when Mark came to the door. She pretended not to notice when Laura cried at the kitchen table. That's the only definition I've ever trusted. The morning after Laura came home, I went to the kitchen early before anyone else was up. I don't know exactly why, maybe just to stand in the quiet for a moment. I pulled out the chair at the end of the pine table, the one she always used to sit in, and I looked underneath the edge of the tabletop. The initials were still there. H, C, and LC, carved in uneven letters by a 9-year-old girl with a butter knife she thought I didn't see. I put my hand on the table and stood there for a minute. Then I made coffee. I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who might have been in Laura's situation, who found themselves somewhere they couldn't leave easily, who felt like they had no signal to send, no one who would come. Your feelings were real. Your experience was real. And choosing to protect yourself is not betrayal. Boundaries are not cruel. Walking towards safety is not a weakness. And to anyone who was the father or the mother or the neighbor or the friend who kept a room ready and a phone nearby and a word agreed upon, just in case, that quiet preparation is one of the most loving things a person can do. Even when no one sees it, even when years go by without the signal ever being sent. I'd like to ask you something, and I mean it sincerely. If you've ever had a bluebird, a word, a signal, a private agreement with someone you love, what was it? You don't have to share the details, but if you want to, I'd be honored to hear. And if you never had one, but you wish you had, tell me that too. Sometimes just naming what we needed is its own kind of healing. Leave it in the comments. I read them. I may not always respond, but I read every one. If this story stayed with you, I'd ask you to subscribe to this channel, not because of numbers, but because this is what we do here. We show up, quietly without announcement, and we tell the truth about families. The hard parts and the tender parts, both. There's a note in the video description with a couple of resources, a mental health line, and a domestic violence helpline for anyone who might need them. No pressure, no advice from me, just there, in case. I'll leave you with the only thing that really needs to be said. She texted one word. I drove 90 miles in the rain. Some promises don't expire.